You can always compete if you're good at the footballing aspects of FC, no matter the meta. What's up guys, Big Feds here with an updated guide on how to play like a top 1% player, no matter the meta. The biggest misconception in FC is that tactics, formations, and the player you use are what makes you a good player. While it has a small effect, these things affect your decision making. And it's your decision making that decides if you're a good player or not. Your decision making is based around the principles you use when you play, not the formation, not the tactics, and not the players. I've repeated this every year, but it is still as true now as it was then. The reason these tips are effective is because while FC is a game, in its essence, it's always going to be football. Football at the highest level is just doing the basic fundamentals consistently and without much error. And the basic fundamentals that apply to that football is always applicable in FC, which means you can always compete if you're good at the footballing aspects of FC, no matter the meta. All of the gameplay in this guide is straight from my streams or my coaching sessions. I make an unreasonable amount of comebacks when I play. The reason for this is I very rarely feel that I'm not in control of the game, even if I'm losing. And that is because I can easily pinpoint what's going right and what's going wrong. And one of the most common mistakes people make is that they play out of habit and routine, which means you have a tendency to overlook what actually has happened. You need to have a clear intention in your decisions. Purpose means you have a clear reason behind every action you make. And every action you make, whether that's an attack or when you're defending, it has to be to change the game in your favor. Without purpose, just easy to read. Even something as a sideway pass can be game changing. Take a look at the clip that's currently playing. My opponent plays a pass with no intention or purpose that allows me to easily win the ball and ends up in him conceding a goal 8 minutes into the game. In comparison to when I win the ball, I already have an idea of what I want to do by knowing where my players are and where there's space to use. After 6 passes from winning the ball, I end up scoring another goal and we're up 3-0 at 50 minutes into the game. Every decision you make is based on the information you have. The more you see, the more information you have. The more information you have, the better decisions you make. And the better decisions you make, the harder you become to play against. This is where scanning comes in. Scanning gives you information and it allows you to have a purpose if you use it correctly. Without scanning, your decisions are based on habit. Make a decision that will put yourself in a bad position because you don't see any other option. When scanning, you need to look for where your teammates are, who's available, and what way are they moving. You need to look at your opponent, how is he pressing, and who's covering where. And lastly, you need to look for where there's space. Where is it open? Where might it potentially open? And here we take the option where our opponent is least likely to win the ball, as he's not looking to cover the area where our player is moving towards. People mistake patience for slow play. That's wrong. You can play with tempo and intensity while still being patient. It's one of the hardest balances in football. It is, however, one of the more rewarding ones as well. Tempo doesn't mean rushing. It means that the ball keeps moving at speed and with purpose, even if you're waiting for the right moment to attack. The key to it is to play in the direction your player is facing. When you force a pass against your player's body shape, it takes an extra few seconds, it increases the chance of the pass going wrong, and it allows the opponent to reset. When you play in the direction you're facing, you keep the tempo, and it gives your opponent less time to react to what you're doing. Now, the patient aspect comes from knowing that tempo doesn't always mean you have to play forward. If your opponent is compact, you can quickly move the ball from one side to the other, going backwards or going sideways. The key here is to keep the tempo to get your opponent to shift, which will eventually lead to an opening. This is especially important where the pass doesn't go where you wanted it. In the example currently playing, I want to pass it to the striker, but it locks onto the player behind him instead of the player I wanted it to go to. Instead of forcing something that isn't there, I adapt by playing towards where the player is facing. It still allows me to find a good opportunity that I unfortunately don't take. You always hear coaches tell players to play a few touches or to play quickly in general, and it has many benefits. One of the main reasons for this is because it shifts your opponent's focus. Whenever you slow down, take many touches, or play slowly, you're giving your opponent time to take a breath, give him time to reset, get comfortable, and get ready to defend. That is why tempo is important. When you play quickly with a clear intention, you're consistently forcing your opponent to shift focus. Every decision you make forces your opponent to react. And if you can make many decisions in a short amount of time with a clear intent, your opponent is definitely going to mess up somewhere. Keep in mind here that we're not talking about creating a highway of space or a mountain of time. You're basically looking for a gap of 1, maybe 2 seconds where you can exploit an opening that shows itself. One of the biggest differences between the top players and everyone else is that the top players consistently ask the defender questions. Most players struggle when creating because they only think of one option, they tunnel vision. When you ask the defender questions, eventually it forces the defender to make a decision he doesn't want to make. And now asking questions can be done everywhere on the pitch. In the example currently playing, I get the ball out wide to one of my players. Instead of forcing something and challenging, I turn around to see what my opponent does. When I turn around, I pass it to one of my players to make my opponents aware of the fact that I might look to pass it backwards, which means that when I get it back, I see that I have space to take the ball into, which will give me time and it will allow me to ask my opponent a few questions. Number one is, am I looking to dribble all the way back? Number two is, am I looking to pass it back again? And number three, am I going to look for a pass centrally through his players? What my opponent does here is that he moves his player to cover the pass back, and by doing that, he opens up the passing lane towards our player in the box, which is the option we take, and it results in a goal. Being dangerous is all about finding the most progressive pass. It's the one that takes your team closest to your opponent's goal, and it forces your opponent to turn and react. That's how you create pressure. But being progressive doesn't always mean that you have to go forward as quickly as possible. So when you're scanning, you should ask yourself, is the most progressive pass available? And then you slowly filter out all the decisions you can't make until you find one that allows you to eventually look for a pass that is progressive. Sometimes the only way to open a progressive pass is by going backwards or sideways first. Looking sideways and backwards can allow you to create new angles, pull opponent's defenders out, and give that progressive option you're looking for. There are many different shapes you can use no matter what formation you're playing to help you with all of this. To keep your tempo, to find the most progressive and dangerous pass, and avoid straight line passes. Firstly, you've got the triangle. It's the most basic one and the one you should look for much everywhere. It enables passing options and support angles. It helps you maintain possession, create overloads, and find quick combinations. Secondly, you have the diamond, which is good to offer passing options. It's very good in tight areas because you always have angles where you can find players. Thirdly, you have the box shape, similar to the diamond. It's just a good balance overall. And lastly, you have the W shape, which is one you see everywhere in football, where you try to occupy each vertical channel, which helps you create width when playing. It makes it easy to find side switches, while at the same time stretching your opponent's defense and forcing them to react to your players that are standing out wide. Another extremely common mistake that I see people make is that they play where they want to be, not where the space actually is. It makes you predictable and very easy to defend against. One of the simplest but most powerful principles in football is play where there is space. Playing into space gives you time. The closer you are towards your opponent's goal with time, that's how you create pressure and control. When you play into space, instead of forcing the ball to wherever you want to be, you consistently tell your opponent to react to what you're doing. You're forcing him to move towards you. By doing this continuously, that is how your opponent is eventually going to make a mistake. If you rush things and play wherever you feel like you deserve to be or want to be, that's how you get frustrated and lose the ball easily. An overlooked aspect of football is stretching the pitch vertically. You hear a lot about width, but you never hear about verticality. This means that sometimes going backwards is the best way to actually get forwards. If you go backward, you're forcing your opponent further out of position, which gives you more time and space to exploit the gap he leaves behind. If he doesn't push up against you, he's forced to turn and reshift his focus, which gives you time to reset and start over. But doing this continuously, eventually your opponent will lose his patience and push up. Being marked doesn't mean you're not playable. A teammate can still use you if you're showing for the ball with a clear plan. If the defender is coming from the right side and you pass it to the left side, you're inviting your opponent into press, you're opening up space behind him, disorganizing your opponent's structure while keeping the tempo and progressing up the pitch. Where you lose, it matters. I hear so many people say they controlled the game, they were better, but the opponent won just because he counters. Not really taking into account how the counters are happening, and very often the counters are happening because you lose the ball in a high risk place. Generally, there are a few high risk zones you never want to lose the ball in, where you have to play safe to not allow a counter. That is in the inner channels and the middle thirds. When you are in these positions, always take the safer options. The semi-risky zones are when you're in the attacking third in the inner channels. You can still be hurt if you lose the ball. Usually your opponent needs to run the entire pitch, which should allow you to get back on time. And lastly, out wide and high up the pitch out wide is where you can take the most risks, because usually losing the ball there requires you to mess up a lot for you to be punished immediately. The reason for this is fairly simple. When you lose the ball in your own back third, it almost always ends up in a shot at the very best. and at the very worst, it's a goal you concede. Losing in its central areas gives your opponent an open pitch to make any decision he wants. You have to be reactive, and it's all about damage control. The reason you can lose it out wide is because your opponent only really has one way to go. One of your best teammates when defending is the touchline. Your opponent can't go there, so he either has to go back, which allows you to reset, or he's forced to go into a very predictable area. You need to play where you have more players than your opponent. Sounds easy in theory, harder in practice. The numerical advantage has to be in isolated areas or specific situations. Usually to spot these advantages, you need to look at how many of us are there versus how many of them. Where do we have an extra man? And can I move the ball there before they recover? You need to count the goalkeeper. With the goalkeeper, you always have an extra man. You need to leverage that to create numerical advantages on the entire pitch. If you can leverage that, there's always going to be space somewhere on the pitch for you to exploit and give you an advantage. This is one of the most powerful principles in football, and it's used almost everywhere. And it's the third man. It's how you break lines and progress even when the direct pass isn't on. Let's say you want to get from this player to this player while our opponents are blocking him. We use a third player to connect those two, which allows us to get where we want. And it incorporates many of the tips in this video. Secondly, we have the bounce pass. You pass it to a player with the intention to immediately pass it back. It allows you to keep tempo while making your opponent push up and open up space for you to use. Another interesting one is the line of three. It's similar to the third man. It's when you have three players standing in a line, all three being playable, where you look for the furthest, invite pressure towards that player, then you pass it backwards to the player in the center, which puts him in a situation where he's got time and is facing your opponent's goal, which wouldn't have happened if you passed to him directly. This one I feel a lot of people know, but they don't use it to its fullest potential. Most people just use it when they're close to an opponent's goal or where they want to get through the last line of defense. The give and go can be useful on the entire pitch. I use it almost everywhere. The only thing you need to keep in mind that you don't push up too many players, which leaves nobody defending if you lose the ball. This is also another common one I see people use, but it's also somewhat underused. Many people use the layoff to get forward. It's a pass that's usually hard to get through. Where I feel it's underused is in other parts of the pitch. It can be used to help you keep momentum and tempo when you're playing, even when you're further down the pitch, especially when you're building up and trying to get into your opponent's half. Double runs can be a very effective tool to create space and movement for your team, which gives you many options, especially if you have a clear idea of what you're trying to do. You can get two players to make a run at the same time to open space simultaneously and give you options. You can make a player go for a run and another to meet, which gives you a nice combo to look for. The way you learn in real life is the same way you learn here. The drills in the training ground and the practice arena where you can set up your own situations can be extremely useful in giving you an environment that has no stakes, that is completely adapted to the situation or principle you're trying to learn, while still being similar to the situations you're put in while playing actual games. Drills in the training ground are usually specific situations pulled out of the pitch to train on that specific part, as you can see in the example currently playing. This is a lot of information and it's impossible to learn everything at once. I recommend focusing on one thing and trying to get that into habit, instinct, before you move on to the next one. But yeah, that is all I had for this guide. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment. I'll do my best to answer, or hit me up on any social media platform. I do stream my games on Twitch if you want to catch up outside of the videos. But until next time, I hope this is helpful and take care.